Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the webinar with Gamechanger Farming and AgriWebb. Thanks very much for signing up and joining. My name is Scott Miller, National Sales Manager for the finishing side of Gamechanger. We're joined by Sean Roddy, who is finishing BDM, but also nutrition specialist. Sean will be talking about the grazing transition and managing grassland. Also joined by Emma Parkinson. Emma is Senior Rearing Manager, who has deep knowledge of worms and everything worm related. So she'll be talking about that side. And we're also joined by Beth, who is from AgriWebb. She's our account manager, sort of works closely with the Gamechanger team. So Beth will be sharing some sort of insights in weighing and vet and med, and obviously anything else that's coming up with AgriWebb as well. So we will just give it another couple of minutes for a couple of more people to join. We will be doing Q&As. So what we aim to do is get some questions in after each of the speakers have said their piece, and we'll do a sort of slightly larger, wider Q&A session at the end. So there should be a Q&A button down the bottom of your screen. So if you use that rather than the chat function, then yeah, we'll get to those as and when we can. If we don't have time to answer your question, or we need to go away and come back with a more detailed answer, we will do that. So yeah, bear with us on that side, but we'll just give another couple of minutes and then we'll begin. The session is also recorded, so if you have to drop off for whatever reason, we will send you a recording afterwards. Doesn't seem like there's too many more people joining, so over to you, Sean. Thank you.
Hey, yes, so I am going to just talk a little bit through planning to manage and how we manage turnout of cattle out to grass. It's a pretty critical step, as with any transition with the livestock. So we want to make sure that we're getting it right while still maintaining animal performance while on farm. So yeah, Beth, if you move on to the next slide. One thing you will always hear me harp on about is dry matter intakes. Dry matter intakes is the absolute pinnacle we want to focus on when we're looking at driving animal performance. Right. So if we're maximizing the dry matter intake of an animal, we are maximizing the genetic potential of that animal on your farm. An animal's ability to maximize its intake will impact its performance, its immune system, and its ability to cope with any stressors or environmental or disease risks that are placed upon it. So if we're able to drive energy and drive protein intake, we will minimize any performance issues we might have on farm. One of the things to consider when we're out at grass is that rumen capacity will always become a limiting factor. Grass is only about 8% dry matter. Maybe in early spring, when on the first round, we could have grasses that are 11 and 12% dry matter, but typically we're sort of working at 8% dry matter. And on a wet day, it could drop down as low as 4% dry matter as well. So with that in mind, we always have to consider the stock we're putting out. Younger animals have a far more limited capacity in their rumen. So a 100-kilo calf can only consume about 15 or have space for 15 to 25 litres in that rumen. And for a calf of that age, to meet maintenance alone, it would need to eat about 30 kilos of fresh grass in a day to actually just meet maintenance. So the physical ability of a young calf to survive off grass alone is extremely limiting. And that's, one of the things we want to try and negate, and we want to drive intakes at that early point as much as possible. In comparison to a 400-kilo calf or animal, it has a rumen capacity over 100 litres. And then when you're getting up into big mature dairy cows, some of them can get up to 120 to 150 litres capacity. So their ability to eat grass and consume large amounts of it is far, far greater. So we always have to bear in mind of what is our most limiting factor when we're turning cattle out to grass. If you move on then. So, sort of starting it off, when and where to turn out. This isn't just open field gate and let them run wild. There needs to be a plan. So when we're turning cattle out, we want them to be in a well-sheltered paddock to start off with. We don't really want to be sticking them right up onto the top of a hill. Although depending on what parts of Wales and Scotland you're in, everywhere is a hill. So, we want to avoid turnout in unfavorable weather conditions. Again, the weather plays a big impact in terms of actually dictating what that animal's maintenance requirement is going to be. If it's cold, wet, windy, that is the animal's energy requirement to just stay warm and stay alive is going to increase dramatically. Also, if that calf, if that's a whole new experience for it, while also being outside for the first time, that calf's ability to go off and find feed is going to be limited. So we're going to have an impact on dry matter intake as well, which could lead then to pneumonia issues, scour issues, and a drop off in performance. Stuff that Emma will touch on later on is obviously we want to avoid turning calves out onto same field every single year in the first paddock because it'll have an impact on pathogens. We want to ensure calves have access to good, clean, fresh water. So if we're turning calves out, the job that should be done before calves go out is clean a water trough to make sure that they've got good, clean, fresh water. As I said, they're rooming, they might only have capacity for 15 to 25 litres. It's a massive part of driving their dry matter intake is making sure they have enough fresh water. We want to be offering some straw as roughage. And as well as that, then we want to be targeting low covers of grass for calves to initially go out to. When we're trying to encourage any animal to transition from one feed to another, the feed we're looking for them to go to, that needs to be more palatable than the feed that they're already on. Otherwise, they are selective animals. They'll just stick to what tastes the best, just like kids. So we move on there now. So this is just a little bit of what do cattle need. So you can see their dry matter intake. Typically, cattle will eat 2 to 2.5% of their dry matter intake, or their body weight in intakes. And what we're really trying to drive at grass is as high a dry matter intake as possible. So these figures are based off 2.5%. So maintenance alone for a young calf at 100 kilos is 25 megajoules, and you're looking at 40% more energy required to put on a kilo of live weight gain a day. And that pretty much for 60% of their energy intake compared to a kilo of live weight gain a day is roughly what you're looking at. So yeah, their maintenance requirement will build. This will obviously impact their feed efficiency as well. So I'll touch base on that in a little bit, but that gives you an idea of really what we need to be driving. So we almost need double the amount of energy at every point to drive a kilo of live weight gain, which is what we're looking to try and drive in this model. Yep. So again, what will grass support? That's a big element of it. I've got two examples here of 11 ME and 12 ME grasses. We can get grasses that are 13 ME and above, but they need to be very well managed to drive that quality up in it. An 11 ME grass is pretty much what you would expect on average for an animal to consume if it's set stocked. So looking at animals, if you were set stocking them, well, and they were on grass alone, a young calf with absolutely no environmental pressures. If the weather was perfect, the temperature was perfect, the grass in that paddock was nice and palatable, that calf on grass alone would just about survive. So it won't thrive. It's not going to do very well. It's just going to put on 0.5 of a kilo of live weight gain at very best. And as you can see, as you move up, as the rumen capacity of those animals increase, the ability for them to thrive off grass alone increases. But what we really want to show here is that the importance of managing grass. So if we can encourage good intakes, we've got 3 leaves, high digestibility in our grass swards. We are putting the same emphasis in having fresh feed in front of the animals on at least every 2 to 3 days. They should be getting fresh grass. We can drive energy intakes, we can drive the energy density of the grass, and we can drive intakes of the grass more, and we can start to drive intake, we can start to drive performance. So when we're getting up at that 400 kilo beast, a 12 ME grass could drive a kilo of live weight gain a day by itself without any supplementary feed. If we're able to drive grass quality even further past that 12 ME point and really drive intakes and manage it really well, there is the ability to get animals performing really well from 250 kilos to 300 kilos off grass alone, but it does require a level of management to get it there. We're not going to get those sort of performance off grass alone. So, a big point with grass is that grass is not a cheap feed. It is not a low input system. It's a high level of management system. And, I'm sure that's some of the stuff that Beth will be talking about, is how you're actually managing the grass and using tools to do this and drive this quality forward. So this isn't just about we need to supplement feed at grass. There is really good performance achievable at grass, but we need to manage it. If you move on to the next one. So this is just a little bit of a guide on typically when we're moving calves, when we're moving cattle out to grass, of what I would typically see on UK farms, where it's kind of a mix of a hybrid. It's not intensive grassland management, but there's a little bit of rotation and there's a reasonable amount of grass quality there. What we're looking at is your 100 to 200 kilo calf. It physically just doesn't have the capacity to get enough grass into it. So really coming out of rear, they're going to be ad lib on nuts and straw. Ideally, they would probably spend a little bit more time in a shed before being turned out to grass and get them transitioned onto a forage and get the rumen conditioned to digesting grass-based forages. So we might introduce them to silages and first before moving them onto grass. But sometimes the environment dictates, if the sheds are not ideal and the weather is really warm and dry and we've got a very stuffy shed, they may actually be better off going straight outside, but they would need to be still fed really well. We're not looking to cut these calves back to 2 kilos really quickly. It's a slow transition. As we build intakes, and if the grass is highly palatable, then the calves will naturally transition onto grass themselves. As we get up into higher weights, then your 200 to 300 kilo animal, well, what we're looking at is we're looking at an animal then that the 2 to 3 kilos of feed will probably cover their maintenance requirement, and grass is going to do all the growing. So it's just an insurance policy to make sure that those animals are able to cope with any unexpected stresses or strains as their intakes grow. And then your 300 to 400 kilo animals, if your management of grass is really good, we can get away without any supplementary feeding, but equally it might be 1 to 2 kgs, which is a small percentage of their overall intakes. This could be something as simple as rolled barley. We're not looking to supplement them with a high level of protein at this point. And it may just be a management tool to make it easier to bring the cattle in for weighing or the like, that if they're used to being fed a little bit of stuff in a trough, they'll come to you rather than scarpering off to the other end of the field. So that's just a little bit of guide, but every single farm is different. And it just depends on the level of management that's going into the grassland management. But certainly the 100 to 200 kilo animals, that would be pretty standard of what we'd be looking for you to do. If you move on then. So grassland management, what do we then need to consider when we're actually out of grass? So calves in particular, young cattle, are very selective in grazes. So they're not going to want to graze out paddocks hard. And it is really important that we provide a sward that's really high quality and palatable to make sure that they're grazing it out. Again, those lower covers that are a lot of leaf will encourage them to graze more. Perhaps in these sort of scenarios, you're better off following the silage and grazing after grass to really drive intakes. We don't want to force calves to graze out. If we're working on a longer rotation, grab calves first with younger stock. If you have suckler cows or sheep or older stock, let them do the hard work later. Again, don't leave calves in long paddocks for a long time. We want them moving every sort of 3 to 4 days. One of the bits I was always told when I was managing grassland farms was you can grow about 30% more grass with a back fence, and cattle should never be able to graze grass 3 days after it's been eaten, because it takes the most amount of energy to grow that first little bit. And if the calf, it's also the most palatable. So if the animal comes back and nips that off, then it's going to cost you twice as much energy again to try and grow that. So you can grow a lot more grass with rotation and grazing. And as I said, Emma will probably lead on to rotational grazing does help to reduce down the pathogen levels in your swards, which is also really important with your young calves as well. Yeah, we can move on. So, I've talked an awful lot about feeding and the importance of feeding and making sure we're driving these dry matter intakes. But, this is not just about shoving feed down the throat. It is something, there is a value to it from your end as well, particularly with young calves. Yesterday is always a more efficient day on farm than today when it comes to cattle. They are far more efficient when they're younger. So we want to make use of that. So for every kilo you're feeding a calf at 100 to 200 kilos, it's going to take you 2 kilos pretty much to put the same weight on when it gets to 300 or 400 kilos. So it's very worthwhile in terms of reducing the overall amount of feed that animal is going to consume in its lifetime if we're able to maximize performance in that young time. What you'll see there on the figures is that from a feed conversion efficiency perspective, a calf at 100 kilos will convert every kilo of feed at 22% efficiency compared to an animal at 400 kilos that only converts at 13% efficiency. So there is massive savings to be made there in terms of daily live weight gain and feed conversion efficiency and purchase feed on farm. If you move on then, yeah. So again, monitoring performance. We couldn't be on an AgriWebb conference without me talking about weighing cattle. It's really important, within the overall scheme. It's vital that we're able to see what animals are performing and ensuring that they're doing a minimum of that kilo of live weight gain a day. But when we're managing cattle out of grass, there is even more variables. So we really want to see that management is focused in to get that maximum performance. So what we're looking at is a weigh and a turnout to see, well, where are we at? Where are we starting? And where do the animals sit in terms of what's the plan? How much do we reckon they will utilize off grass and build from there? We've got our mid-season weigh-in as well, because again, we want to make sure that animals are performing. By the time we get to winter, if we haven't weighed the cattle and we're just hoping that they've put on weight during the winter, if we have to correct it over the winter time, it's going to be a lot more expensive because, again, we've lost out on that feed efficiency benefit of younger animals. So by getting a mid-season weighing in as well, if there is corrections we need to make to improve performance, we have enough time at grass. Grass is our cheapest feed, and we can change management to try and rectify any poor performance that we're having. And equally, if we're seeing that performance is going really well and animals are doing really well at what we're doing, we'd be then reluctant to change what we are. So if perhaps we're contemplating, well, maybe I'll pull a kilo or two of nuts out and just put them on grass alone, and we weigh the cattle at that mid-season point before making that decision, and we see that they're performing above expectations, then perhaps we can do a calculation to see, well, is it worth just keeping them moving on and getting off farm sooner? So again, mid-season weighing is really important. And then when we're coming back into housing, then at winter, that final weighing, we'd be hoping that when the calves are coming off grass in the back end of the year, they're probably moving hopefully straight into a finishing shed or close to it. And we're able to get a target then of how many days do we reckon we're needing them for winter, and get a plan in place then for how much feed we need on farm, get our silages analysed, get diets formulated based off the weight they are, the weight we're targeting to move them off farm, and get a diet in place to maximise performance then going back in the winter. Yeah, we can move on then. So then, yeah, just a basic little summary just to cover off these bits. Maximising your dry matter intakes is always the focus. It will be something I would always harp on about, whether it's grass, the palatability of your feeds, of your nuts, the quality of your silage. We are focused on trying to make sure that this feed is as palatable, as tasty for these livestock as possible, so they eat as much as possible, so that we can meet their genetic potential. We are dealing with some really high genetic potential animals, So the more energy we can drive into them, the greater the performance we know we can achieve out of them. Grass is our cheapest feed we will produce on farm, but it is only cheap if we're getting performance. If every single day those animals are out of grass and they're not performing, they're standing still. They're not only costing us on that day, but they're costing us later down the line when they're more inefficient and they're requiring a hell of a lot more feed to get caught back up. Again, young calves do not have the room and capacity to perform on grass alone or on a high percentage of grass. So we really want to make sure we're not pulling feed away from calves too soon. We need to drive their performance. We want to drive that intake potential on that calf so that when it does have the capacity to eat grass, it has the capacity and growth rates to really thrive on grass. Again, making use of your feed conversion efficiency when calves are young is a major driver to reducing your overall lifetime feed costs. And finally, then high levels of grassland management drives the energy the energy density of your grass, the utilization of your grass, the intakes of your grass, and also the overall grass yield on your farm. So you should be able to get better performance, higher intakes, lower feed costs, and a higher amount of grass grown on your farm as well. And I think that is all of my little bits and pieces. I do see I have one question.
There is a question for you, Sean.
For me to read it out and answer them, Scott?
I'll read it out, you answer it. So Matt has said, or asked, would a 14 or a 16% protein feed be better if supplementary feeding?
Again, it is going to depend on the age and weight of the calves that are out at grass. So if we're on those 100 to 200 kilo calves that are eating a very small amount of grass, you're probably still looking at a 16 to 18% nut to drive growth and drive frame growth. As grass becomes a larger proportion of their diet, then you're just looking to supplement with energy. So again, your 14%, your rolled barley are more than enough because your grasses could be anywhere from 18 to 24% crude protein. So we just want to balance out that protein with some additional energy.
And then Naomi has asked, is there a particular type of new lay that you'd recommend?
No, again, you can grass. How would I answer this question as diplomatically to not insult seed companies as much as possible? You can get really good grass intakes off old pastures. It just depends on how you manage them. There is an awful lot of research and trial data done, particularly in Ireland and New Zealand, on the benefits of clover swards, on the benefits of multi-species swards. And there would be an awful lot of anecdotal evidence from farmers that they will do well on swords, on grass clover sward mixes. I would tend to view that, you should have clover in every single sward because one, it's going to reduce down your fertilizer bill. Two, it's highly digestible and it's highly palatable. It's high in protein. These animals will thrive really well on it. If anyone's a sheep farmer, if you go to fatten lambs, they will fatten like stink on clover. These cattle are basically built the same. They will grow like stink on clover swords as well. So high clover as much as possible, but overall it's just about having as much leaf as possible and as little stem.
Cool. But keep the questions coming in for Sean. But thanks, Sean. We'll now move on to Emma to talk about the worming side of stuff.
Hello, everybody. So I'm Emma. I'm Senior Area Manager and an SQP or rammer. And we're going to talk about the effective parasite control in young grazing cattle. So obviously cattle, you have endo and ecto parasites, ecto being outside, so your flies and your lice. Today we're going to talk about the endos because obviously Gamechanger, we're running a very intensive system and growth rates are absolutely imperative. And endoparasites, so your flukes and your worms, they can reduce your weight gain by over 200 grams a day. So obviously throughout the whole grazing season, that's quite a substantial weight loss that we would ideally want to avoid. So I just wanted to put a little section in here on coxy. Obviously, coxy is more common in young calves, so 3 weeks to kind of 6 months old. However, it can be triggered by stress. So obviously transport, changing farms. So it's something we just want to keep an eye on. The clinical signs normally are diarrhea, so quite horrendously smelling diarrhea, and normally containing mucus and flecks of blood. You'll also see the animal straining quite a lot, so painful attempts to pass the feces, resulting in prolapse rectum sometimes. Also weight loss, poor growth, ill thrift. You see like quite a gaunt appearance in their face, and weakness and dehydration. It's really important here to just note that 95% of infections are actually subclinical, so you won't see any of the clinical signs. However, they will still be severely impacted on their growth rates. Obviously, in our system, we have a very stringent coxy protocol in rear, so you shouldn't have any of these problems, but it's just something to be aware of, just in case. So first, we want to look at the gastrointestinal roundworms. So roundworms are one of the most common types of internal parasites for cattle. They have quite a basic life cycle. So they reproduce in the gut. They're then released in the dung, the eggs. They then develop into larvae, and then they migrate onto the grass and they go back into the animal. So the life cycle is normally around 21 to 28 days. However, that's under ideal conditions. So in really warm, dry weather, this can be much longer. So that's just the basic life cycle of the roundworm. So the first one we're going to look at is your small intestinal worm. So in the UK, it's the Couperia species. They're the most common. So they live in the small intestine. They are the most prevalent worm in the UK, and it causes really slow growth and lack of appetite. They are a dose-limiting species, which means basically there's a lot of resistance to these. So it's very, very hard to kill them. There's a lot of resistance mainly to your ivermectins. So if you know you've got an infection, really you want to avoid your ivermectins if you can. And they do also appear as a mixed infection. So you'll normally have some gut worms going on as well. And then these are in the small intestine causing an issue as well. The other thing to note on this is because of them being in the small intestine, a drench is really the best for them. So an injectable or a pour-on isn't as effective, just at reaching them really. They're not very prevalent. So they are, there's about 200 eggs per day the females lay, and they are most common in young calves. So they normally develop quite good immunity after the first grazing season. But it's something we really, really want to keep an eye on in their first grazing season. And then from there on, they're all right, really. So the next one is a brown stomach worm. So the one we're looking at in the UK is your Osteotargia osteitai. So that lives in the abomasum, and it thrives in your cool, wet weather. And it's the most common worm when you're looking at growth rates and low feed conversion. So it's a really important one. This is quite a horrible worm. Not any of them, none of them are nice, but this is a particularly horrible worm because it can hibernate in the stomach lining. And then it can have this mass emergence. So you have two types of infection. You have your type 1, which is your normal infection. They're living there in the abomasum. They cause diarrhea, weight loss, stunted growth. And then you have your type 2 infections, where this is where you have your mass emergence. They damage all the glands and the animal's abilities to absorb the nutrients from the food. And that can cause acute illness and death. So it's really, really nasty parasite. Again, most cattle develop quite good immunity to it after 1 or 2 grazing seasons. However, the adults will still carry them in low numbers. So although it's not affecting the older cattle, they are still acting as kind of shedders to the rest of the herd. So that is something to look at. And again, there's only about 100 eggs per day, so nothing massive. It's quite a standard worm when you're looking at your fetal egg counts. So the next one we want to look at is Barber's pole worm, so your homuncus. Again, this is quite a horrible worm. It's known as the blood-sucking parasite, and it actually has teeth, so it attaches itself to the wall of the abomasum and sucks the animal's blood. So not very nice at all. It's one of those worms that unless you don't know you've got it, basically, well, not you personally, obviously the cattle, you don't know your cattle have got it until it's quite a substantial burden. So what you'd normally see is your animals would start to be quite lethargic, and when you look at their membranes, you'll see quite pale membranes, so it causes anemia. And another thing that you'll see with this is a bottle jaw. So similar to what you'll see with fluke is that swelling underneath the lower jaw, which is a bottle jaw. So that's something to look at. Females lay around 5,000 to 10,000 eggs a day, which is quite substantial. And this is another reason your fetal egg counts are very good, because the vets and the SQPs will be able to tell really when they see the egg counts, the number of eggs in there, that you're most likely you've got an issue with your Barber's pole worm. Again, as your clinical symptoms don't really show until you've got quite a severe burden, this just kind of reiterates the importance of monitoring that throughout the grazing season. So the next one we're going to look at is lungworm, also husk, as some people will call it. So again, standard, it thrives in the warm and wet conditions. This is a funny one because immunity does develop very quickly. So the cattle will develop that immunity very quickly. However, it wanes within 6 months. So they'll develop it very quickly and lose it very quickly. Farms that know they've got an issue with lungworm, it is really, really recommended that you vaccinate just to, increase that immunity. And as you can see from the photo on the left, it's quite nasty. All that white in there is the lungworm in the lungs. So it just really causes a difficulty breathing with the animal. If you've never heard of it, never had it, the things to look out for would be coughing, loss of condition, rapid breathing or struggling to breathe, loss of appetite, nasal discharge and salivation, and obviously reduced milk yield, but not that that's something we're looking at in this system. But they're the things to really keep an eye out for. And then if you realise you've got an issue, then you go in with your vaccinations. Lungworm's quite cool, if that's the word, with how it's spread. So it's actually spread, it's aided by the fungi Pilobolus. So Pilobolus basically grows on the feces, and the eggs will hatch and they'll basically climb up the fungi, and then the spores at the top will explode and they can send the larvae up to 3 meters away. So this is really quite vital in the spread of lungworm, and this is the only worm that this happens with. So that's just something to keep an eye on as well. So on to everybody's favourite, liver fluke. So liver fluke costs the cattle industry over £40 million a year. The thing with liver fluke is most of the worms we've spoken about previously are species specific, so they will only affect the cattle. So when you have your mixed grazing and your rotational grazing, the sheep will come in and hoover those worms up. It won't cause them any issue at all, and then it's ready for the cattle to go on the next year. However, with fluke, it's not species specific, so it's the same fluke that affects your sheep to your cattle to everything else, also rabbits. And animals have very little immunity throughout their life. So basically all animals, all ages, are affected by it. It's very similar to your homuncus, with it doesn't really cause many clinical signs until it's too late almost. So you'll have a very heavy burden. You'll see anemia, protein and blood loss, weakness and death. And you'll also see that classic bottle jaw. The thing with liver fluke is you can fetal egg count for this, but by the time they've shed the eggs into the feces, you've already got quite a severe infection. So the best thing to be doing here, just to monitor this, would be blood testing, because you can pick that up within 2 weeks of infection. So that's really important to be going on with through the grazing season. The life cycle of the liver fluke is slightly different to your roundworm, as it has an intermediate host, which is a mud snail. So it's very similar, as the eggs are released in the feces. However, they then hatch, they go into the mud snail, reproduce again, and then they're released and back into the animal. The thing here to note is, so one adult fluke can lay 50,000 eggs a day. Then they'll hatch into the miracidium. Each miracidium entering your mud snail can then release 700 Cacaria. And each mud snail itself can have 30,000 of its own eggs. So the life cycle, it's replicating very, very, very quickly. So it's something you really, really need to be on top of. So you really need to be blood testing and monitoring this throughout the season. It's also important to note that mud snails only like to live in the kind of damp, wet areas. So if you've got a field that kind of hangs wet, if you can't avoid it and you've got to graze it, then you really need to be on top of your blood testing and making sure you've got your flukicides ready to go. So on to the control and prevention. Obviously, if possible, you want to turn out first grazing season cattle onto low-risk pasture. So that's pasture that's not been grazed by cattle in the previous year. However, if that's not an option for you, then you want to consider carrying out fetal egg counts and blood tests, like we mentioned. We don't just want to be dosing cattle with wormer every couple of months. We really want to be just monitoring that as we go. For second season calves, we want to again be monitoring the fluke with your fetal egg counts and your blood tests. And then if necessary, you want to be treating for all stages of fluke. So you can speak to your vet or your SQP about which product's most suitable. But for fluke, you want to be really looking at triclobendazole. So we'll talk about that in a couple of slides' time, because you want to be killing all stages. And then with lungworm, where there's a risk of lungworm infection, obviously based on your farm history, you want to consider vaccinating. And if not, then you want to be monitoring that and vaccinating if you need to, and coming up with a health plan with your vet or SQP. So just a bit of a brief overview on your types of wormer. So obviously with sheep, we have quite a few other classes as well, but with cattle, we've just got the 4. So we have group 1, which is your bendomazazels, which is white wormers. So these are active against roundworm, lungworm, tapeworm, and liver fluke, only adult liver fluke. However, there is quite a lot of resistance to these wormers. So these aren't really ideal if you're looking at treating your animals. Group 2, which is your levamisoles, which are yellow wormers. So they are effective against roundworm and lungworm. There's not much resistance to this group of wormer, so this is a really, really good one if you want to be treating. If you're worried about a mixed infection with your osteotargia and your Caperia, then group 2 is a really great wormer to go for. Group 3, your macrocyclic lactomes, your clear wormers. They're again effective against roundworm and lungworm. However, there's again a lot of resistance, especially your Caperia. So you've got a lot of resistance there. So that's one to watch. You can, if you want to use that wormer and you've been advised to use that wormer, another good thing to do would be a fetal egg count before and after dosing, just to make sure it's killed what you want it to kill and there's nothing lingering around. And then lastly, you've got your narrow spectrum products, which is your flukicides, and your main one here is your triclobendazole. So this kills all stages of liver fluke, and that can be, you can have that as a sole product like your endoflukes, that's triclobendazole, or as a mixed product with one of the other groups as well. And then just a bit on the responsible use of wormers. So like we say, you want to choose the correct wormer for the specific parasite. So you don't want to be using a triclobendazole if you're trying to treat a roundworm, because you're not going to get very far, and vice versa. You want to be treating only the animals most at risk. So with your young stock, you want to avoid unnecessary treatment with good natural immunity. So if you've got cattle, you've done your worm egg count, you know you need to treat them. You're meant to leave 10% of the good healthy cattle. So the ones doing great growth rates, they're not affected at all. They don't need treating. So leave them be. They've got their good natural immunity and they don't need a drench. So you only want to treat the ones that are most at risk or showing signs of infection. You want to treat the cattle at the most effective time based on grazing patterns. So obviously it completely depends on your farm system, but you want to monitor, like we say, with your fecal egg counts and your blood testing, and then treat accordingly. You want to dose accurately according to each animal's body weight to prevent resistance. So this is a really, really important one. You really need to make sure you're dosing for the heaviest animal in the group. So, or if not heavier, because underdosing is one of the main ways we're getting resistance now. So you want to be making sure if you can't weigh everything, at least get the weight of the heaviest animal and treat of his weight, just to make sure you're not leaving any of those worms behind to then reproduce and cause resistance. And then at the end, we've got administer wormers correctly by following label directions. I know this sounds like a bit of a boring one, but it is really, really important. Obviously, we don't want to be drenching a pour on or injecting a drench, but ensuring products are handled and stored appropriately is really important, because there's a lot of products out there that if you leave them, for example, in direct sunlight, they will become completely ineffective. So you may as well be using water. So it is really, really important to make sure you're following the directions. And that's it. So that was a real whistle-stop tour of the endoparasites.
Cool, thank you, Emma. So a couple of questions for you. Lucy has asked, do they need to be medicating for cocci from the start? So that was back to your first slide.
Yeah, so I know a lot of people do have the medicated feed for cocci. However, if you're using that feed right from the beginning, those animals are getting no chance of building any immunity at all. So what you'll find is the animals that have had that in rear, they'll then move on to their growing stage. They'll see cocci for the first time and it will really hit them and you'll get an issue. So what we do is we dose at certain times in rear with a product that allows them to build their immunity up as well. It doesn't just kind of clear them out. It just kills one stage of the cocci. So that's really what we do, and it works well.
Cool. And then Matt has said, what about giving an LA wormer on Turnout?
So ideally, you don't want to be doing it right when you're going to turn out. The reason behind that would be if you've got any worms there that are resistant at all, what you're basically doing is you're drenching them, turning them out for them to poo all their resistant worms out onto the grass. And then you're going to have a massive problem. So if you're going to do that, you want to make sure you leave them in for at least 48 hours after you've dosed them, because then at least they're, releasing them inside rather than out where you're grazing.
Cool. We'll come back to your questions at the end, Naomi, if we have time. But yes, over to Beth.
Good evening, everyone. For those of you I haven't met before, I'm Beth and I'm an account manager here at AgriWebb. I've been supporting the Gamechanger team for a good part of 3 years now. You've probably liaised with Georgina. She is the brains around the product largely, so has helped me with compiling these slides today. Ultimately, you know that AgriWebb is a farm management software program that allows you to capture the data that we've been talking about at hand tonight, so namely weights and treatments. So I'm going to spend the next few moments going through weights and treatments. There are other features within the product as well, so if you have questions after today's session that you want any support with, please feel free to reach out to us and we'd be happy to give you some one-to-one training, or equally show you where you can access the Gamechanger specific content that we've got in place. So I'm going to go through how to record weights. Obviously we're a mobile app and web app component, so there's ways to do those on either aspect of the product. I'm going to talk about the weight insights, the forecasting and reporting tools, and then also how to record treatments and the treatment reports. So looking at recording weights then, these can be done in two fashions. So the most popular one, and ultimately the way the product has been developed, is via a live session. So you're probably all aware that via your tablet or phone you can capture a live session by visiting the livestock tab, starting a live session, connecting any hardware that you might have at hand, so your TrueTest, AgriDent, Readers, Gallagher, etc. We're compatible across iOS and Android devices, so you can scan your tags, link up your weigh indicators and bring that weight across instantly. And then obviously once you capture those sessions, the weights are stored against the animals' profiles, and then you can see how they're performing on a case-by-case basis. So that's the most efficient way of capturing the details. Similarly, you can import your weights from a CSV. So we're aware that obviously with the True Test kit, when you capture a session, it's stored within the device, and you can download that and upload it into AgriWebb. So again, you're probably aware that we've built a template that you just drag and drop that CSV into the web app and upload the weights so that they can be done all in one fell swoop. So these are just some images to show you how it looks. So on the left-hand side here, you can see a live session. This is in a tablet view actually. So you'll see that you scan the animal's ear tag, the weight comes up, and as the kind of lifetime of the animal progresses and there's more weights in the system, you'll see an indication of their average daily weight gain and overall daily weight gain listed below. You get an underlying insight into their previous weight, date of birth and days on farm. And then the right hand side is the CSV import, which I alluded to. So you can drag and drop your file in there and just indicate the last weight and date weighed and pull that into the system. So where we've made a lot of investment actually, and specifically for the Gamechanger scheme, is around our weight insights and forecasting piece. So if you haven't had time to look at it, I'd really encourage you all to do so. We've got a lot of feedback that it's particularly helpful in terms of understanding when batches of animals are ready to leave for finish, and just simply understanding how performance is progressing across the different batches you've got on farm. So what I've just given here is a very brief overview. So these are the key indicators that you can filter by on the weight insights. So you've got estimated live weight versus age here in this graph, live weight over time here, and then you've got estimated live weight in the bottom and average daily live weight gain. So as you'll see, they speak as they find, but you've got the data that's added in on your side, and then the charts speak for themselves. You can then expand them, export them into CSVs if you're needing to identify which animals are in which category. But all of these are, again, for you to access within the platform. And then the forecaster, so that's what I spoke about at the beginning there. So again, you can plan ahead. It's been built to allow you to do that. You can filter the batches and look at how your groups of weights are performing across 3, 6, 12 months of age. So you'll see it more directly in the product, but just giving you an overview here, it ultimately helps you know when animals are ready to go, and plan for when you might be looking for a new batch. So this is a screenshot of that indication for you. So you can set a target weight in here or a range. You've got minimum and maximum, suggested target date when you'd be looking for them to be ready, and then the system automatically calculates those that are under, on and over target for you, and as you can see, it gives you the projected weights, assumed average daily live weight gains, and average required average daily gain as well. And similarly, it works in the same way. You can click on the graph here, and then it indicates which animals fall into which category. So I can look at these 8, and then the product will enlist those 8 for you. You can have a visibility of all their VIDs and any historical information that you want to about those as well. So again, please do have a look at that if you haven't already. And then the weight reporting, so again within AgriWebb we've got a number of reports that are specific to individual animal management, but we have 2 that are very relevant from a weight progress point of view that are helpful for you, and certainly from a Gamechanger holistic view of how animals are performing from rear to finish. So you've got your on-farm performance and your lifetime animal performance, which, as they may suggest, you're on-farm looking at those that are still with you, and then the lifetime animal performance, any that have been sold, dead, recorded as off-farm as well. So that enlists everything in terms of their on-farm prices, number of days, average weights, everything really that you're capturing on the day-to-day is populated into there for you. So then just quickly to go over treatments, similarly to weights, they can be done via a live session. So you again may have seen that we've got record templates within live sessions that you can set up to customise how you're adding in animals and treating batches. If you're weighing and treating at a given time, you can do the two together. Or you can just ordinarily do it through a live session in a group. The other way is to do it via a bulk record, so you can access your individual list on the mobile app and treat them individually, or from a management group or a location, both of which are possible on the mobile and web app. Again, conscious of time here, so I can't go through every step for everyone tonight, but if there's questions around any of that or how to do a treatment, then please feel free to let me know. But should be fairly intuitive in terms of how to capture that information on both the web and the mobile app. And then similarly, the individual record, so you can click on an animal's profile directly in AgriWebb, and it gives you the option to add records on the bottom right, and every record that you've got access to is there, so treatment is one of those. And then really, as Emma said, I think making sure that your inventory is up to date as well, for wormers, for any kind of vet med items that you've got. You can make sure that that's fully up to date on AgriWebb too, and obviously we encourage you to do so. So this is a screenshot of the web app where you can come in and just put in new livestock treatment inventory. There's a catalogue of treatments and vaccines, injections, etc. all in there that you can populate, and then just pre-fill the data you need in terms of withholding periods, dosage rates, expiry dates, all of that, and add in your costing. And this then will feed into those other reports that I mentioned, say a lifetime performance report, as well as being listed on the animal's profile. So top tip of getting your inventory up to speed, it'd be worthwhile making sure that you've got everything live and ready there. And then this is really two screenshots of how to apply the treatment. So on the left here is what it looks like when you're applying it on an individual or bulk level. So you'll see you put in the dosage. You can do that relative to the weight and the mil or litre that you're applying. We've allowed for any spillage to be captured as well, so you can keep on sort of like dead check with the volumes that you've still got left in your inventory and your containers. And then you've got reason for treatment. There's a drop-down list there of different and commonly required reasons for treatments for you to select those. And again, that's then relayed into your reports. And then on the right-hand side, this is what I was mentioning in terms of a live session. So it looks a little bit like the weight session, but here I've just got one animal that we've scanned in. And again, you've got his profile listed here, even in light of like the previous session, looking at their weights. But you'll see that it can just automatically apply that dose of Metacam, and then you save and next, scan the next animal, and so on and so forth. So, you scan the wand and pull up the profile and treat them as is. And then finally, the reports. So similarly to the weights, we've got treatment reports that are built around the reporting features that they've got in the sessions themselves. So as I've said, you add your treatments in and they're accessible in the treatment report. You can customise the date range that you're needing to for an overview of your historical treatments. Those can be exported into Excel and printed out. And then again, ultimately, all of it's ready for you from a compliance farm assurance perspective. So you can see an overview here of what it looks like. So I've come to my report section, customised by, say, financial year or previous year. Gives me an overview here of how many treatments I've applied and how many animals have been treated. And then a common list of all of the reasons for treatment. So quick snapshot of those that are most commonly captured on your farm. And then at the bottom here, you can see a list of all the animals that have been treated with the relevant substances that you've got listed. All of which, as I've said before, can be exported and printed, so to make it as easy as possible for you. That was lightning speed, so I'm hoping it's helpful, but I don't know if anyone's got any questions at all for me.
There's a couple of questions coming in, Beth. One is on the weight forecaster. Can you set the date beyond 3 months' time when you're looking at those forecasts?
Yeah, 3, 6 and 12 months we've got at the moment in there for the categories.
Cool. And then there's another question that's come in. So it's, as a calf grower, will the treatment records of the calf rearer be visible to me in individual animals, which is not something we transfer through the AgriWebb transfer. We keep those records separate. You can always, if you've got a question around an animal that you've got on farm that's been transferred, you can always speak to your BDM to ask. We can always go and have a look at treatment records on individual animals, but as a rule, we don't move them across. We obviously move over the weight side of stuff. I think it's worth reminding people as well that you get, as a Gamechanger farmer or Gamechanger customer, you get the full version of AgriWebb. As a minimum, we ask for the weight data, and that's again to look at performance, to help us with things like the genetic selections that we're making. But as a customer, you are absolutely free to use the vet and med side of it, the grazing management side of it, which I know the guys have been working on, and there's some really, really great stuff going in terms of rotational grazing. And if you're really into your grassland management and looking at sort of sward densities and stuff like that, that's all in there. And again, you are fully supported by the AgriWebb team. So any questions you've got, it's as if you've paid for it, because essentially we've paid for it on your behalf. So it's a really good software package. Speak to the guys if you want to use it for more information. We'll go back to a couple of questions. I did say to Naomi to use the Q&A function, but she can't. It's not on her phone, so I will forgive her for that. So Emma, Naomi has asked how often you would worm egg count, and also if you treated animals following that worm egg count, would you move them straight off the pasture or wait a period of time and then move them off to a different pasture?
Okay, yeah. So I would advise worm egg counting once a month, really, just to stay on top of things. And then if you've treated them, very similar to the other question about treating before they get turned out, you really want to wait. Do not move them for 48 hours just to prevent that resistance, the resistant worms going on the pasture. So if you want to treat them, it's best to treat them, leave them where they are 40 hours, then move them to fresh pasture would be the gold standard.
Cool. Sean, I've got a question for you. Some of my customers will, when they transition out to grass, if they've got a shed that's sort of backing onto a paddock or a pasture, they'll let the calves run in and out and maybe shut them up at night, let them out during the day just for a sort of week or so. Is that good, sensible? Doesn't make a difference?
Yeah, no, it can be. If you're looking to try and get that turnout happening a little earlier, it can be really beneficial, particularly when we've got quite warm days and cold nights. If you're looking at what sort of the soil temperature and that can get down to, letting the calves come back in and lie on warm, dry straw bedding can have a massive benefit in reducing down how much energy they use up for maintenance. So it's just, again, that insulating factor. So yeah, using that sort of half in, half out system can be really beneficial. But, you're probably looking at trying to actually actively encourage that you are closing them out during the day if it's a really good day. And then possibly, if the weather's going to be a bit challenging, is actually bringing them back in and closing them. So maybe if you're feeding them nuts, feed them the nuts in the morning out at grass, and then in the evening time, as last job in the evening, you feed them their nuts in the shed to bring them all back into the shed. Another bit as well that's seen on quite a few farms that's really good for transitioning, particularly young calves or any cattle out to grass, is quite a few farmers, if they're feeding a nut, will use a snacker to get calves out. It saves the mess of trying to go out with a bag of nuts and feed, because we all know when we try and go out with a bucket or that into a bunch of calves, once they've learned the habit that you've got feed with you, they're over around you, knocking you around the place, and it can end up on your arse. But also, as well as that, it actually helps to encourage the calves to stick their heads down into the grass and start grazing, because unlike suckler calves that have a mother there sticking their head into the grass and grazing and showing them what they need to do, going out with a snacker can actually help to encourage them to go, oh, I put my head down here and I eat the green stuff as well as the brown stuff. So yeah.
Yeah. I think I've got a lot of guys that will do that in sort of high risk TB areas, rather than having troughs on the ground, just moving around where you feed every day. With 1 minute left, Beth, I'll ask my final question to you, which you might shoot before, but what is the most exciting development that's coming to AgriWebb in the next 6 months or so?
That's a great one. Well, I mean, there's too many probably to list, but we have, I guess, one of the most exciting ones that has come in recent months is our grazing planner. So as you said, we haven't gone over the grazing elements here, but we've made a lot of refinements to that, and we'll be continuing to do so in the next 6 months. So I'd imagine that, if you haven't already looked at that, it'd be worthwhile doing so. Otherwise, we're doing a lot of specific features for or updates for Gamechanger, as you know, that'll all be beneficial to you. So the reasons for treatments is one that we're looking to make easier, and generally sort of like adding data entry from the purchase side of things. So yeah, watch the space for updates on that side, but they'd be the key updates for now.
Cool. Thank you very much. Right, we finished bang on time. Thank you everyone for joining. If you've got any further questions or you think of anything, reach out to AgriWebb, reach out to your local BDM or the Gamechanger team. We can put you in touch with Sean, Emma, or Beth. But yeah, thank you very much. See you again.
Thanks everyone. Thanks.